interest and for the convenience of the House, I decided to inform the House that the Clerk of the Parliament has today received notification from Lord Mandelson of his intention to retire from the House, effective from 4th February. I will formally notify this to the House tomorrow in the usual way. Tributes to the Lord Wallace of Tankernes.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, David Blevins, who joins us in Washington. David, we are picking through more and more details of what is being revealed in these Epstein files, but it's certainly showing that Lord Mandelson's period as the American ambassador to the UK is not covered in glory.
And what an extraordinary fall from grace it has been, Jane. This time last year, Peter Mandelson was beginning one of the most illustrious, one of the most sought-after roles in British politics, UK ambassador to the United States. You will recall that soon after taking up that office, my colleague James Matthews interviewed him at an event in Washington where he questioned him about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. The embassy here in Washington was not very impressed by that, describing it as a cheap shot for clicks on an old story. Well, that old story came back to haunt Mandelson in a big way over the summer when the so-called Epstein birthday book was published, in which he described the disgraced paedophile as his best pal. Now, of course, Peter Mandelson subsequently said he deeply regretted his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and expressed his apology and regret to the survivors of Epstein. Since then, of course, he's been in the headlines a lot, but I think it is worth reflecting on the fact that just 10 months ago, Peter Mandelson was standing in the Oval Office at the White House alongside Donald Trump, celebrating that UK-US trade deal. You may remember Donald Trump referred to his beautiful accent. Peter Mandelson said, "My mother would be very proud." But just in a matter of weeks later, when that birthday book was published and the association with Epstein came back to haunt him, Sir Keir Starmer sacked him as UK ambassador to the United States in a telephone call at 5:30 in the morning. So I suppose it's not the legacy anyone would want in politics, but it is what he will be remembered for now during his short tenure as UK ambassador to the United States of America.
Let's return to Sam Coates, who is in Washington. Thanks for the moment, David. And Sam, in terms of what happens now with the police investigation, just remind us the seriousness, the significance of what Lord Mandelson is accused of in terms of repeating confidential information that happened inside the walls of Number 10.
So Scotland Yard is doing a scoping exercise. That's one stop short of a full-blown inquiry. And they are looking at whether or not Lord Mandelson broke the laws around misconduct in public office. The reason that they are doing that is because of emails that we saw as a result of the Department of Justice disclosure, Epstein disclosure at the weekend, that showed that on 4 occasions Lord Mandelson forwarded or emailed confidential, sensitive material, including sensitive classified emails, and gave market-sensitive secret information to Jeffrey Epstein. On one occasion, that included the news that the €500 billion bailout to try and stop the euro going bust, to stop sovereign nations like Spain and Portugal going under because of the financial crisis, was going ahead. That is a valuable piece of market-sensitive information on the back of which people could have done trading. He also confirmed that Gordon Brown would be leaving office after those coalition talks in 2010 failed. Gordon Brown left the next day. That was not publicly known at the time. These pieces of information, tradable, monetizable, useful, and potentially a breach of the law, that is what Scotland Yard will ultimately be looking at. And today, Jane, the update from Downing Street, well, that was quite extraordinary. They have confirmed that the Cabinet Office is giving active assistance to the Metropolitan Police with this inquiry. They have looked at the emails that came out over the weekend from the Department for Justice, from the Epstein side, and identified those emails that should never have left government systems and involved secret information, and concluded that because some of them did contain were forwarding confidential, sensitive email material for the eyes of government officials only. That was something that they should inform Scotland Yard. They haven't passed the emails on, but they have told Scotland Yard that there has been a breach of security and drawn Scotland Yard's attention to that. And Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister in the Commons yesterday, said that this government stands ready to do whatever it takes to assist the police with their inquiry. You almost get the feeling like the government is keen for a sense of justice, perhaps in part to draw a distinction between and create a bit of a firewall between Peter Mandelson and the Prime Minister, who appointed him about 14 months ago to be our man in Washington and then saw him sensationally sacked back last September. So that is what's going on in Parliament at the moment. But this story, Jane, this story has political cut-through like you wouldn't imagine. Peter Mandelson may no longer be in the gold-leafed chamber that you can see on your screens, but according to focus groups, according to MPs, this is having real cut-through on the doorstep. How did Keir Starmer put in such a high-profile position somebody with known links to a convicted paedophile on the grounds that he was the best man for the job? Why isn't that simply the kind of jobs for the boys thing that Keir Starmer said that he would not do when he entered Downing Street? The political price that Keir Starmer could end up paying is high. And the people who are the judge, jury and executioner, if it comes to that, of any Prime Minister, which is the Labour ranks, Labour MPs, they are genuinely holding their heads in their hand in despair at the events of the last few days, not for the first time in the last 6 months as Mandelson's appointment comes back to haunt them. The spectre of a prominent Labour politician taking cash from Jeffrey Epstein in part, and Lord Mandelson has conceded this, to pay for his partner's osteopathy cause, and then doing potentially illegal favours in the subsequent months and years in order to, by leaking confidential information that could have a tradable, monetisable value. Well, that is the stuff that absolutely harms reputations of parties. So the man you can see there, a doyen of an elite network, and a doyen of the global stage, and a big Remain campaigner back in the referendum in 2016. You can see there him talking at an in-campaign Remain campaign event, is now disgraced. He has, in the last half an hour, notified the House of Lords he will be leaving for good. No longer will he be standing there a few years ago outside that Department of Business with Pat McFadden, still a minister in this government. It's a reminder, those pictures, of just how many friends at the top of government he had and has. Was it those friendships that ultimately meant he got one of the top 5 jobs in the British government barely 14 months ago? Did they turn a blind eye to the fact that he had a close relationship with a known paedophile who had been convicted and jailed for offences involving soliciting, involving a minor? Those are the questions the public is asking. That is why the government is extraordinarily sensitive, and Keir Starmer's own party looking like it's in revolt at what has happened because of the possibly hear no evil, see no evil approach that has been taken to Lord Mandelson because he was one of them. It's the kind of charge the Labour Party made continually at the Tories in opposition, now coming back dramatically to rebound on them. We will hear tomorrow from Keir Starmer, who will have to begin to explain away this mess. We will see tomorrow an attempt, almost certainly an attempt, by the Tories in the House of Commons to put pressure on Keir Starmer. What did he know? How did he know it? Who gave him what advice? Disclosing the documents at the heart of this. We will see whether or not Labour MPs stand in the way of any such attempt by the opposition as would be normal, or simply feel that there isn't a case to answer and hide when the government calls them to do their duty. Is this government able to get its way in the House of Commons in the face of such enormous, such politically damaging affairs? Those are all the questions, and it all comes back to the man no longer sitting in the chamber that you can see on your screen, the peers that you see placid, but the turmoil around the House of Lords, anything but. Peter Mandelson will never sit on the red benches again. He has gone, never to return to the Houses of Parliament again.
Sam, thanks very much for that. Let's return to David Blevins in Washington for us. And David, disgraced from the House of Lords, a possible Metropolitan Police investigation now underway, and also pressure in America from the Senate wanting Mandelson to testify. The Clintons have already said that they will testify. They too mentioned in the Epstein files.
Yes, as Sam was explaining there, Jane, it's not just the fact that Peter Mandelson is alleged to have given market-sensitive information to Epstein. It's not just the fact that he and his now husband are alleged to have taken thousands of pounds from Epstein. And it's not the fact that he's alleged to have shared with Epstein that he had persuaded Gordon Brown to go as Prime Minister. It is the fact that he was continuing to engage with a convicted paedophile, a man who had already been found guilty of procuring a minor for prostitution. And although Peter Mandelson has expressed his regret over that, it is something that continues to haunt him. And those questions, we now know from what Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, has had to say, were already being asked prior to Peter Mandelson having been appointed by Sir Keir Starmer to one of the most high-profile roles in British politics, certainly in the diplomatic world, that of the UK ambassador to the United States. And it explains why my colleague James Matthews felt it necessary to put questions to Mandelson about Epstein when he caught up with him shortly after he was appointed to his role here in Washington.
In June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
He was in jail at the time for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
And my knowledge of him is something that I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Why did you have an association with him? Because he was in jail at the time.
Why did many people meet him? He was a prolific networker, and I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Now, the big news from Capitol Hill right now, of course, is the fact that Bill Clinton is about to become the first former president in almost half a century to give evidence before Congress. He's been subpoenaed by the Oversight Committee alongside Hillary Clinton. That's the committee investigating Jeffrey Epstein. They had refused to appear, insisting that the chairman of the committee was targeting them because they were Donald Trump's political adversaries. They said the subpoena was legally invalid, but they changed their minds late last night when a number of Democrats on that committee voted with Republicans to move towards criminal contempt proceedings. If the Justice Department had proceeded with that, the Clintons faced up to a year in jail. They faced up to $100,000 each of a fine. So they will now appear before Congress in due course. But there are many on Capitol Hill also demanding that Peter Mandelson also appear to answer questions before that same Oversight Committee. Again, we caught up with the Democratic Congressman Suhas Subramaniam yesterday, and he felt very strongly that not just Peter Mandelson, but Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, the former Duke of York, should also come here to the United States of America to answer those questions.
David, thanks very much for that for now. We're just going to cross now to Donald McIntyre, who's author of Lord Mandelson's biography. Donald, very good to get your thoughts today. Of course, Peter Mandelson is known as the comeback kid, isn't he? There's no coming back from this, is there?
No, I don't think there is. Certainly not in any sort of political sense, or I suspect even in a commercial sense. However, I do think he has done, you know, for once he has done the right thing. I mean, I think that both in terms practically for him to go through a humiliating process when you have to be legally, legislatively removed from the Lords would have been very difficult for him. And at least he's shown that he now realises or seems to realise the gravity of the situation. So from that point of view, it's good for him. I'm not sure that it's necessarily, I mean, obviously it's good for the government in one sense. They don't have to legislate, but it does mean that with this unabated, they can't throw their energy, as it were, into getting rid of him from the House of Lords. But I mean, people hoped that he would do this, and he's done it.
We talking about him a little earlier. Sam Coates was talking about him being the doyen of elite networking. Why is he so popular behind the scenes? What is the hold that he has had over the Labour Party for all these years?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back into the mists of time, Peter Mandelson was a big asset to the Labour Party. He was a big asset to Neil Kinnock, as Kinnock turned it round into an electable force, which it hadn't been, and he was good at his job. I mean, no question. And he, made the Labour, helped, let's not exaggerate, helped to make the Labour Party, certainly in presentation terms, electable. So, I mean, he was a very valuable asset to the Labour Party way back in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, he was a, reasonably good minister. He wasn't, he stuck at the jobs he had, both at Department of Business and in Northern Ireland. He worked pretty hard. He respected, and I think was respected by civil servants. So, he has he's gone horribly, horribly wrong. But behind that, or before that, he did have a perfectly respectable political career. I think in terms of the sort of other part of your question, which is how does he become such a networker, not just in the Labour Party, but outside it? Well, he's always had charm. He's always had some wit. He's curious about people. And as we've increasingly come to discover, he's not only impressed by the rich and famous, but happy to do favours for them as well.
But with those skills clearly come failings, and then much has been made of the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was able to spot what people's failings were, potentially financial failings in Lord Mandelson's case. Why were those failings not seen, not uncovered by MI5, do you think?
You're asking me a question that really only MI5 can answer. I mean, it is pretty extraordinary that given, first of all, that it was well known that he had continued to see Epstein after Epstein's conviction in 2008, and some other things as well. He was still holding a 21% share in a consultancy firm, Global Counsel, which must have created in the minds of any decent vetters the idea of a potential conflict of interest. So, I mean, I think there are still a lot of questions to be answered about how the process before his appointment, and indeed immediately after it, because the Foreign Office say they weren't involved until that point, was allowed to be so perfunctory.
And then when we look at it, actually drilling down into what he is accused of doing, passing on government politically sensitive information, encouraging JP Morgan to effectively try to bully the Chancellor to get rid of bankers' bonuses, the passing on of market-sensitive information about bonds. Do you think that there's any suggestion or any hint of that kind of behaviour in his background? Clearly he could charm the birds from the trees, but this is something other, isn't it?
No, I think in a sort of, it's a really good question. And I think in a political sense, if you like, Mandelson had always lived a bit dangerously. He was a bit of a risk taker, and that was part of his sort of character as a politician. But I actually believe those people in the Labour Party who are now saying, they didn't ever think he would go this far or get embroiled in the kind of really indefensible shenanigans that he's been involved in, and particularly was involved in when he was in a very, very senior position, effectively, if not de facto, if not de jure, Deputy Prime Minister under Gordon Brown. And I think, yeah, I mean, you know, my knowledge of him really goes back a long way and stops at a certain point. But there's no doubt that I would not have, and I think a lot of people who worked with him, including even people who didn't like him very much, and there were quite a few of those, would have been surprised at what he now seems to have done while he was in number 10, the things that you've just mentioned.
Do you think he will realise the seriousness of what he's done? He gave an interview to Katie Balls at the Times over the weekend after a huge tranche of this information, the Epstein files, had come into the public domain. So we knew a certain amount of what he was accused of. He didn't really seem to see the seriousness of how his actions were regarded. No, well, I think there's a mystery about this. I mean, the first mystery is that he must have known there was a possibility. I mean, I think the emails which emerged Sunday, Monday, that you've already mentioned, of him passing on very sensitive, market-sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein, were the kind of killer blow. And I think he probably thought, I don't think rightly, but, you know, he has a certain self-confidence, certain chutzpah, that he could possibly ride the previous ones out. And that's maybe why he gave the interview to the Times. But I mean, the mystery is he must have known that more was in the pipeline. I mean, he must have surely reviewed what exactly his relations with Epstein had been. And, you know, he doesn't seem to have taken account of that in advance. So, I mean, you know, either he's had a very uncharacteristic memory loss or he's deluded himself. How bad is this for the Labour Party, do you think? Do you think he could fundamentally bring down the Prime Minister? Well, I think it is very bad for the Labour Party. I mean, it raises some really big questions on why Keir Starmer appointed him in the first place. My sense is, and it's not a deeply informed sense, is that a lot of the blame is beginning to fall on Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. And of course, in a way, Morgan McSweeney is a bit of a lightning rod because a lot of MPs don't like a lot of things, other things that he's done that have nothing to do with Mandelson, like you know, some of the more, if you like, right-wing policies that the government has been pursuing. So, I mean, I don't think Keir Starmer is going to fall immediately, but I think it's bad for him, and I think he might have to sacrifice Mr. McSweeney, who was, it seems, a protege of Peter Mandelson's. Donald McIntyre, Peter Mandelson's biographer, really interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Well, speaking earlier, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry, said that the Mandelson scandal was one of the worst she had heard and criticised the vetting process for the US ambassador's job.
Chuck him out of the House of Lords. Reform the House of Lords. All of that's a given. But really, this goes so far beyond it. I think this is so serious. The idea that a cabinet minister is acting against the interests of the cabinet, against the interests of the country, handing information to a paedophile who is associated with the biggest bank in the world in America and telling them to mildly threaten the Chancellor of the Exchequer is really serious and can't be dealt with by way of just being chucked out of the House of Lords, in my view. I think that it is just one of the worst things I've heard. I mean, we've heard some terrible things, you know, in recent years. We've heard some terrible political scandals. You know, I mean, PPE, and which you know was wrongly bought, wrongly sold, and ended up probably with people dying. I mean, I appreciate that that's a worse scandal, but this is so deliberate and so treacherous that I just think, I mean, you know, I'm of the view that the whole House of Lords thing is a little bit of a sideshow, and that the behaviour is so bad that it's something that the police should be investigating. There was also a huge risk, and I think that it exposes the weaknesses in our vetting process and in our due diligence process. We had the mandarins in front of my Foreign Affairs Committee, and we asked them what the vetting process was. And to be honest, it's so clunky and old-fashioned. I mean, it's like, it kind of harks back to the 50s, you know? It's really, the vetting process is just like, well, tell us if there's anything that we should know about and we will double-check it, you know? And the due diligence just seems to be, look at open source, put it in a document, hand it over. They didn't even have Mandelson in to ask him any questions, which, you know, we said in the Foreign Affairs Committee, this is a political appointment, this has happened before with political appointments, put the person in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee so that we could ask questions.
Emily Thornberry there. Well, the pressure for both Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Lord Mandelson to testify to Congress in the US is coming from both sides of the Atlantic. Our correspondent James Matthews spoke to a member of the House Oversight Committee, which is conducting the investigation.
I want him to continue to come forward. We've asked him multiple times now to come forward and testify before our committee. We'll do it under his terms. But the more he hides, the more files we will find. And so we will find the information regardless of whether he comes to us and testifies. And so it's best for him to come and just tell us what he knows, try to clear his name as best he can. But until then, we're going to continue to probe and find more files. And at some point, I don't know what point, at some point, if we find more evidence of crimes, then the law enforcement, either here in the UK, needs to make a decision about when they should go after him.
Do you think that's a prospect?
I don't know. I'm going to let the evidence do the talking. But certainly if the evidence shows that he committed crimes and it's prosecutorial crimes that, you know, he can be sentenced to, then certainly I think law enforcement should apply the law the same way they would anyone else.
And Lord Mandelson, do you think he should come to the United States and give evidence?
It's the same thing. And I don't care if you're, you know, Democrat or Republican or Labor, whatever country you're in, whatever title you have, everyone who was involved or committed crimes should be held accountable.
Well, if you're just joining us, let's just remind you of the breaking news that's been emerging this afternoon. Lord Mandelson is stepping down from the House of Lords. He will no longer be a Lord from tomorrow. That was announced in the House of Lords in the last 40 minutes. Also that we've heard today from the Prime Minister that Lord Mandelson has let his country down and that there is a need to move at pace in responding to the revelations in the Jeffrey Epstein files. We've heard that the government has passed on the information that they have from the Cabinet Office to the Metropolitan Police. They've referred material to the police after an initial review of Epstein documents showed that they likely contained marketing sensitive information and suggested that safeguards were compromised. That from Downing Street in the last couple of hours. Well, let's get more on this breaking news with our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
On Sunday night, Lord Mandelson signalled he had no intention of completely quitting the House of Lords, but now he has been forced into doing exactly that. Hours after the Prime Minister said he was going to legislate to sling Lord Mandelson out of the Lords, the peer has decided to go himself and has informed the Clerk of the Parliament that he will be stepping down from the Lords entirely. It has been a bruising, punishing day for Lord Mandelson. He is facing a police scoping inquiry to find out whether or not police think he broke misconduct in public office rules for leaking sensitive financial advice when he was a cabinet minister years and months after accepting payments from Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced paedophile financier. Now Lord Mandelson under pressure from all sides to withdraw from public life, to withdraw from Parliament. He has bowed to the enormous pressure that he was facing over this issue and has said that he is stepping down. The long-time Labour peer appears to have been attempted to resist all the pressure, but in the last 36 hours, things have snowballed beyond his control amid that welter of emails showing his closeness across many, many years to Jeffrey Epstein, who would refer to him as Petey, and this question of extensive financial links, payments, tens and thousands of dollars sent, it would appear, to Lord Mandelson. He denies some of them, he accepts others of them. And then yesterday, the bombshell revelation that key details of the financial bailout settlement in Europe were being leaked by Lord Mandelson to Jeffrey Epstein, sometimes emails being forwarded that involved the Prime Minister to Jeffrey Epstein within seconds of Lord Mandelson receiving them. All of that has added up to the kind of opprobrium that cannot be sidestepped, and therefore Lord Mandelson has today announced that he is stepping down from the House of Lords. He awaits to find out the verdict of Scotland Yard.
And Sam, as perhaps Nigel Farage has just pointed out, whether or not he steps down from the House of Lords is possibly not the biggest issue of the day. It is the fact that the government has passed information that they have to the Metropolitan Police and that the police have confirmed that information has been received.
The Cabinet Office referred details about emails to Scotland Yard. That's an escalation. Government very actively helping Scotland Yard's scoping inquiry to determine whether or not Peter Mandelson broke the law with the leak of sensitive information that could have enriched figures in 2008, 2009, 2010. Potentially very serious matters. I've been over in Westminster inside Parliament, Jane, and the absolute outrage of MPs at Lord Mandelson's behaviour, but also the fear, worry and disgust that he ended up being appointed our man in Washington barely over a year ago. How can that have happened? How can that go wrong? It still feels to me that although we are seeing right now the consequences for Lord Mandelson for what's gone on, there are consequences still of a different order, a different sort potentially, for Keir Starmer as a head of steam builds in the Commons, maybe coming to a head tomorrow with some kind of crunch vote tabled by the Tories to force disclosure of documents, maybe pressure building around Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's chief of staff, who really railroaded through that appointment of Peter Mandelson for the job. How can they make Keir Starmer's operation better is the question being asked by Labour MPs, who are pretty desolate about future electoral chances, given everything, every bit of battering that this government has received. Could there be pressure in the Commons as soon as tomorrow, which Keir Starmer has to face up to?
And Sam, where is this pressure coming from? Is this pressure obviously from the opposition benches, but how are Labour backbenchers viewing this? And is pressure mounting on Morgan McSweeney amongst those? Oh,
Jane, there is utter despair when you go and meet Labour MPs. Genuinely, they look wounded, defeated. They have no idea where to turn. They're staring defeat and unemployment in the face, or so they tell me. They want change. They want a better Downing Street, and they are not afraid to articulate it. This includes people who were elected for the first time as part of the landslide barely a year and a half ago. The sheer sense of abject misery on the Labour benches is palpable. The question is, where do they funnel it? Some, I think, do want a change of Prime Minister, but is now the moment? Maybe not. But a lot of them are coalescing their anger around Morgan McSweeney, who is seen by some as the architect of the 2024 landslide election victory, but seen by others as a divisive figure, a factional figure who puts his friends like Lord Mandelson into high places like the job of our man in Washington, British ambassador to Washington, in the face of clear problems, ignoring evidence that there might be difficulties around Jeffrey Epstein, which were evident at the time of the appointment. Maybe this all settles around his head. We will find out a bit more tomorrow when we hear from Keir Starmer in the Commons for Prime Minister's questions, and we see what the Tories do with their bit of time that they get to control the order paper, to control Commons business, to see if they try and force an inconvenient vote on MPs that asks MPs to declare whether or not they want to see the documents around Lord Mandelson's appointment to be published, which could prove tricky for Keir Starmer, but more importantly for Morgan McSweeney.
And if Morgan McSweeney were to go, how tricky a position does this put Keir Starmer in?
So in the last few minutes, a prominent Labour MP who I was asking exactly that question to effectively said to me, look, we could choose to get rid of Morgan McSweeney, but the major question is whether we leave Keir defenceless, because then a challenge becomes almost unstoppable. McSweeney, for all his faults, is seen as an operator, and an operator who has shored up Keir, who is now tethered to Keir Starmer and his future, and has been effective in keeping ensuring that he has his bosses back. But does that hold? That's the question that we see at the moment. Just a few more details. I understand that the departure from Parliament, which has now been announced by the Lord Speaker, will be effective from February the 4th. So it's effective, that means from tomorrow. So it has now been announced in the Commons, and that means, I think, that we have seen the last of, bluntly, Peter Mandelson has taken his last ever steps in the Houses of Parliament. From tomorrow, he is no longer welcome through its doors.
Well, as Sam was just saying, it was announced in the Lords by Lord Forsyth just a short while ago.
Given the public interest and for the convenience of the House, I decided to inform the House that the Clerk of the Parliament has today received notification from Lord Mandelson of his intention to retire from the House, effective from 4th February. I will formally notify this to the House tomorrow in the usual way. Tributes to the Lord Wallace of Tankernes.
Well, this was our correspondent James Matthews talking to the then Lord Mandelson in May last year.
In June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
He was in jail at the time for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
And my knowledge of him is something that I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Why did you have an association with him? Because he was in jail at the time.
Why did many people meet him? He was a prolific networker, and I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, David Blevins in Washington. And David, interesting hearing you and James talk on the Trump 100 podcast earlier about the pushback that he got from the US Embassy after that interview.
Yes, the pushback came from the embassy very swiftly when they described the interview of Lord Mandelson as a cheap shot for clicks on a historical story. Well, it turned out to be not that historical, in that the past came back to haunt Peter Mandelson very quickly. Soon afterwards, the so-called Epstein birthday book came to light, in which there was a correspondence from Mandelson to Epstein describing him as my best pal, and the fallout from that ultimately led to Keir Starmer sacking Mandelson as UK ambassador to the United States in a phone call at 5:30 in the morning. As I was saying earlier, Jane, it's not just the fact that he's alleged to have given market-sensitive information to Epstein, or the fact that he and his now husband are alleged to have accepted thousands of pounds from Epstein, or even the fact that he's alleged to have told Epstein he had persuaded Gordon Brown to step down as Prime Minister, but the fact that he was continuing to engage with a man who was a convicted paedophile. Jeffrey Epstein had already been found guilty at this point of procuring a minor for prostitution. Now, Lord Mandelson has expressed his regret about the friendship, apologised to the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. But if a week is a long time in politics, a year is an absolute lifetime. It was just over a year ago that Keir Starmer appointed him to the office of UK ambassador to the United States. Gordon Brown has suggested that there were even questions about his links to Epstein at that stage. And in May of last year, he was standing in the Oval Office, shoulder to shoulder with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, celebrating the fact that the UK had secured the first trade deal with the Trump administration. And here we are today. He's not just been sacked as UK ambassador, but has now stepped down from the House of Lords too. It is quite the fall from grace.
And David, you know, aside from all of the drama about what he did or didn't do, the real world implications, aside, of course, from all those victims of what Epstein did, currently, we don't have the UK is meant to be sitting as leading the UN at the minute, and we don't have anybody on that role, do we? Because that person is currently acting up as US ambassador.
Yes, and I think that is one of the difficulties, that there's been this lengthy period of time between the sacking of Peter Mandelson and the arrival of the new ambassador to the United States. That has now happened. But of course, the fallout from this continues to dominate discussion on Capitol Hill as well. It's astounding to many people that on Capitol Hill, they're not actually talking very much about Donald Trump, despite the fact that if you carry out a search of the so-called Epstein library published by the Department of Justice, you will find 5,176 returns on that search, 38,000 mentions of Donald Trump. But we have found no corroborating evidence for any of the allegations of wrongdoing against him, and therefore the potential for defamation is very real, and explains perhaps why US networks are not talking very much about Donald Trump. Instead, they are finding themselves talking about the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and the fact that there are those on Capitol Hill who feel he should come now and answer questions before the Oversight Committee. The fact that they're talking about a man who wasn't widely known in the United States until he became ambassador, Peter Mandelson. Members of Congress are also suggesting that he should come be subpoenaed to answer questions before the Oversight Committee. Although a subpoena can only be enforced to an American citizen, he would have to come of his own volition if he chose to do so in due course. The big talking point, of course, today is the fact that Bill and Hillary Clinton have decided that they will answer questions in relation to Epstein. Bill Clinton's appearance on the Hill in due course to do that will make him the first former president in more than 40 years to answer questions to Congress.
And David, it's worth remembering that in terms of all of these drops that we've had about Epstein, the so-called Epstein files, as we're calling them, there is still a lot more to come, isn't there? We know that Pam Bondi is holding some back.
Yeah, there are 6 million plus files described as Epstein files. They come from documents related to investigations into the disgraced financier who was ultimately found dead in his prison cell while awaiting trial on new charges. He had previously been convicted of procuring a minor for prostitution. But there are 3 million plus of them now in the public domain, another 3 million not there yet. But already the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who was himself previously Donald Trump's personal lawyer, has said there is no plan to charge anyone else with any offence in relation to what has been revealed in the files to date. He's also said that no matter how much information they put in the public domain, they believe people will not be satisfied. I think it is worth reminding people, Jane, that this became such an issue, perhaps because it was a conspiracy of the Trump administration's own making. During Donald Trump's election campaign, he promised the release of all the Epstein files, but shortly after he returned to the White House, his Attorney General Pam Bondi said there was nothing to see. That was just a matter of days after she said the files were on her desk ready to go, and that only poured petrol on the fire, so to speak. It fueled the conspiracy that was raging around Jeffrey Epstein, and not just him, but added to the questions of who knew what, who was in his inner circle, and those are questions that remain unanswered to this day, despite the fact that there are millions of files now in the public domain.
David, as we're talking to you, we've just had a statement from Downing Street regarding Peter Mandelson. It is brief. It just says, it's from a Downing Street spokesperson, "It is right that Peter Mandelson will no longer be a member of the House of Lords. As the Prime Minister said this morning, Peter Mandelson let his country down." So that is the official response from Downing Street to the news that Peter Mandelson is stepping back from the House of Lords, which was announced within the last hour. Returning to David Blevins, who is out there, the fact, David, that Peter Mandelson was a Lord will certainly not have done him any harm when it came to moving in the kind of circles that he liked to move in America.
Absolutely, and I think the best illustration of that is when we reflect on Donald Trump's recent state visit to the UK, how much he enjoyed the pomp and circumstance, even on that day last year when Peter Mandelson was alongside Trump in the Oval Office celebrating the fact that the UK had secured the first trade deal. He said a few words, the President turned to him and said, "What a beautiful accent," to which Peter Mandelson replied, "My mother would be very proud." But in relation, I have to say, to the statement we've just had from Downing Street, many people will continue to ask why Keir Starmer made the decision to appoint Peter Mandelson to the office of UK Ambassador to the United States. Gordon Brown's statement suggests there were already questions being asked before that appointment was made. Certainly there was a lot of surprise at the time. There were other names in the mix, potential ambassadors, people who could have taken up this illustrious role. People were quite surprised when it was Peter Mandelson, a man who had twice been sacked from the cabinet, a man who had been dubbed by the tabloid newspapers many years previously the Prince of Darkness, the spin doctor extraordinaire at the centre of the New Labour project. People couldn't quite believe that that's who they were investing their trust in at this pivotal moment when they were attempting to establish relations with a new Trump administration, the President having just returned to the White House a couple of weeks earlier.
Yeah, indeed. And James, you said that not that much interest, that much knowledge in America of Peter Mandelson, but now this has all happened. Is this now being picked up by the American media?
Yeah, well, when my colleague James Matthews was on Capitol Hill yesterday, he was speaking to one Democratic congressman, Suha Subramaniam, and he was quite adamant that both Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, the former Duke of York, should come to Capitol Hill and answer questions put to them by the Oversight Committee. That is the Congressional Committee that is investigating the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. As I said a moment ago, Jane, if either of those men was to come back to Washington to answer questions about their association with Jeffrey Epstein, they would have to do so of their own volition, because subpoenas are not enforceable to non-American citizens. I think many people regard it as highly unlikely. Instead, you just have to look at the fact that the former President Bill Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, did everything in their power to avoid answering questions and have only changed their minds at the last minute because some Democrats on that committee voted with Republicans to move towards criminal contempt proceedings against the Clintons.
OK, David Blevins for us there in Washington. Thanks very much for the time being. We're going to leave David because we're going to go to our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who is in Parliament's central lobby. John, what reaction there to this breaking news this afternoon?
Well, Jane, firstly, let me give you the reaction from number 10 Downing Street. A spokesperson has said it is right that Peter Mandelson will no longer be a member of the House of Lords. As the Prime Minister said this morning, that was at the Cabinet at the beginning of the meeting, Peter Mandelson let his country down. To assess the reaction in the House of Lords, I'm joined by Baroness Foster, Arlene Foster, former First Minister of Northern Ireland. How are peers reacting to this news?
Well, I think it's broadly welcomed. We first heard of it when the Lord Speaker announced it at the beginning of proceedings this afternoon, that he had received correspondence from Lord Mandelson that he wished to retire effective tomorrow, I think the 4th of February. I said on Sky News last night, would you believe that if he had any self-awareness, the first thing he should do is actually retire himself from the House of Lords.
Perhaps he was watching.
I'm not suggesting he was watching him, but I do think it's absolutely the right thing to do. Of course, it doesn't take away his title. He can still use his title if he so wishes, and that, of course, can only be taken away, we understand it, by primary legislation.
But there seems to be a clamour for that, doesn't there? I mean, there is such anger, particularly over the leaking of confidential and sensitive, market-sensitive documents, emails to Jeffrey Epstein when he was business secretary. How likely do you think it is that there might be that legislation brought before the Commons and indeed the Lords?
Well, we understood yesterday that Labour members were saying it's all very difficult. I think one of the ministers in the House of Commons said it was a very complex matter.
That was Darren Jones.
Yes, Darren Jones. So actually it's not that complex. It would just be a very distinct bill that would go through fast procedure.
A one-clause bill?
Yes, exactly. It would go through very fast procedure in the House of Commons, and I would imagine there would be no objection raised either in the Commons or indeed in the Lords.
Lord Mandelson, of course, was Northern Ireland Secretary for a while. He had to resign from that post over a passport application. What was your view of him then when he was Northern Ireland Secretary? Did you think there was something a bit about Lord Mandelson? Did you have concerns?
No, well, I mean, he was always the Prince of Darkness even in Northern Ireland, but he was quite ineffective, I have to say. Secretary of State whilst he was there. He very much enjoyed the trappings of Hillsborough Castle, which of course the Secretary of State stays in when they come to Northern Ireland. I understood had some very nice parties there as well. I wasn't invited, John, so I can't comment on that. But he was an effective Secretary of State until he had to resign, and I think that was his first resignation.
No, it was the second.
It was the second. Of course, it was the second resignation.
First one was over Jeffrey Robinson's loan.
That's correct. So second resignation. And then, of course, he comes back again. But what I was really struck by was the fact that at the beginning of the year, in January actually, he was trying to rehabilitate himself and doing interviews again. And even in his interview in the Times today, which of course was given before these new tranche of emails came out about the market-sensitive information, he was claiming he'd done nothing wrong and there was no misdemeanours. Well, clearly there were, and therefore that's why there's been this growing story round about the Palace of Westminster over this past few days.
You said he was the Prince of Darkness when he was Northern Ireland Secretary. What do you mean by that?
Well, he would have got things done in the way that he wanted to get things done. He was very good at flattery. He was very good at working with people and getting them to do what he wanted them to do. But he was an effective Secretary of State. He did listen to people when he was there. And of course, that's the great tragedy. He had many skills and many talents, but unfortunately, he has shown himself to be rather treacherous.
Treacherous. Did he appear in the Lords very much?
No. The last time I seen him in the Lords was before he became the ambassador to the United States. And of course, he took a leave of absence from the Lords when he became British ambassador, so we haven't seen him for quite some time.
And you used the word treachery then. I mean, that's a word we've heard from a few politicians. Yes. How serious do you... I mean, presumably you would say the most serious thing here in these Epstein files is the leak of confidential business information. One was about a government bailout. One was about selling off government assets and so on. While he was business secretary, he talked also about lobbying Alistair Darling, the then Chancellor, about tax on bankers' bonuses. I'd imagine you would say that's the most serious thing, I guess. Would you say that, or the fact that he was Epstein was paying money to his partner on some of the other things? What's your view?
I think from a governmental point of view, clearly the worst thing is the fact that he was sharing emails that were clearly meant for a confidential list of people to make government policy, and he had shared it outside of that very tight group. I think that is, as it's not me that's saying he's treacherous, it's actually people that worked with him in the Labour Party who feel so let down, and I totally understand that, because so many people in the Labour Party came out to really stand up for Peter Mandelson on so many occasions, and this is the final straw, I think, when they see that he was actually sharing market-sensitive information with somebody who actually is a financier and who stood to gain from it.
Very briefly, what do you think all this says about the Prime Minister's decision to make him ambassador, given all the warnings?
Yeah, well, I think that's the key matter now, isn't it? What does it say about the Prime Minister's judgment that he was persuaded? And don't forget, this didn't happen very quickly. There was a period of time when there was a lot of talk of, is he going to be made ambassador? Is he not going to be made ambassador? So he clearly was persuaded to allow him to go forward, and I think that was a huge mistake.
Arlene Foster, Baroness Foster, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your instant reaction there. Back to you in the studio.
John, thanks very much. Really interesting to get that reaction from down there in Central Lobby. In the last few moments, we've had reaction from the Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch has put out a message on X. She says 5 months ago, Mandelson was UK ambassador with the full confidence of the PM. Today, he is no longer the ambassador in Labour or a peer. The scandal, sleaze and speed of his downfall only increases the scrutiny on Starmer and McSweeney's decision to send him to Washington. So that reaction there from the Conservatives. Just a reminder of the breaking news in the last hour. Peter Mandelson has stood down from the House of Lords. He will, from tomorrow, no longer be taking his seat. Downing Street have said it is right that Peter Mandelson will no longer be a member of the House of Lords. As the Prime Minister said this morning, Peter Mandelson has let his country down. Also worth reminding you that information has been passed from the Cabinet Office to the police after an initial review showed that Mandelson likely passed on market-sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein. More after this short break. Hello, good afternoon. We start with breaking news. Lord Mandelson is to quit the House of Lords amid allegations that he passed market-sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein. Earlier, Downing Street said the Cabinet Office had contacted the police about the latest revelations from the Epstein files. Sir Keir Starmer said Lord Mandelson had let his country down and that there was now a need to move at pace. Well, the Speaker of the House of Lords announced Peter Mandelson's resignation a little earlier.
For the convenience of the House, I've decided to inform the House that the Clerk of the Parliament has today received notification from Lord Mandelson of his intention to retire from the House, effective from 4th February. I will formally notify this to the House tomorrow in the usual way.
In the last hour, a Downing Street spokesperson has said it is right that Peter Mandelson will no longer be a member of the House of Lords. As the Prime Minister said this morning, Peter Mandelson let his country down. In the last few minutes, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, wrote on X, 5 months ago, Mandelson was UK ambassador with the full confidence of the PM. Today, he is no longer the ambassador in Labour or a peer. The scandal, sleaze and speed of his downfall only increases the scrutiny on Starmer and McSweeney's decision to send him to Washington. Well, joining me now is political commentator and former Labour advisor, James Matthewson. James, how do you regard the events of the last couple of hours, really?
Afternoon, Jane. Yeah, it's been a wild ride this afternoon. I think things have moved at pace. I don't think anyone really will be surprised that this is where we've ended up with Mandelson. I mean, many people for years, they wouldn't say it publicly, but privately have obviously had questions about him, not just in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, but in relation generally to the fact that he's always found himself wrapped up in a scandal. And it should be no surprise that a man who relishes his reputation as the Prince of Darkness, would find himself associating with those kind of people. But I must say, for me, it is staggering that we are so concerned with the fact that, he's done this, he's done that, he's let down his government, he's fed information, he took money. The very core principle here should be the fact that he was friends and maintained friends with one of the most prolific sex offenders of all time after it was public knowledge what he was doing and what he was accused of and what he'd been convicted of at the time. That alone, for me, should be enough for Mandelson to be held accountable for that connection and that affiliation that he's held.
Well, indeed, and there was a great deal of opprobrium to his behaviour before the revelations of the last 48 hours or so. Why do you think the government didn't listen to the warnings that were there before they made him the US ambassador?
I think the Labour Party has a tremendous weakness at its heart, and its weakness is often personalities. It falls for these personalities, these kind of figures, these grandees, the giants of politics, if you like. And Mandelson, for a long time, has been one of those figures. I know people in young Labour circles, in Labour student circles, who have tried to emulate Mandelson and looked up to him, seen him as an idol in some cases, which, I mean, is bizarre. It couldn't have been me. But, at the same time, I do think we have to acknowledge the scale of this for the Labour Party. He is one of the most recognisable figures when it comes to Labour politics for the wider public. And for him to be caught up in something quite so scandalous as this is significant. And if Keir Starmer doesn't act further, and I believe he should act significantly, he should push for Mandelson to have his title stripped from him. That should be the next step. If he doesn't do that, then I think it will just show that weakness continues to live on.
I mean, how serious is this for the Labour Party? As you say, this is a man who has done so much for the Labour Party for so many years, yet his actions could fundamentally, potentially bring down the Prime Minister, do you think?
I mean, it certainly adds another nail in the coffin. I think Keir Starmer will be not happy about how this reflects on him, but he shouldn't be. And everybody in the world should be disappointed by this and should feel let down by this. And I have to be clear, when we talk about these people, and I've got to say it as it is, I'm afraid, Jen, these dirty old men who have been running the world for so long. One of them is currently the President of the United States of America. His connection to Jeffrey Epstein seems to be even stronger than that of Peter Mandelson. So we should be questioning at every turn what action will be taken to give justice to the victims, the women and children who've been the victims of Epstein and the victims of others, because they should be at the center of this. And I do agree with Prince Edward's comments about that. And I think that we need to be able to take the maximum action that we can against people like Mandelson.
James Matthewson, former Labour advisor, really good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is in Westminster. John, what reaction in the House of Commons and the House of Lords to what's happened over this afternoon?
Well, Labour MPs will be pleased that this has happened. A bit of relief, really. I mean, there's still the embarrassment of the scandal of Lord Mandelson, and the knives are well and truly out for Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. I mean, all the signs are he's going to follow in the same way as various Svengalis over the years, Alistair Campbell, Andy Coulson, Dominic Cummings, who had to go. I mean, he looks highly expendable now, since he was the one who pushed for this appointment. Now, over in the House of Lords, of course, they heard the news from the new Lord Speaker, Lord Forsyth, Michael Forsyth, former Tory cabinet minister. He's only been in the job. It's his second day, made the announcement. A short time ago, I spoke to Arlene Foster, Baroness Foster, former First Minister in Northern Ireland, and I asked her what was the reaction to the news about Lord Mandelson over in the House of Lords.
It's broadly welcomed. We first heard of it when the Lord Speaker announced it at the beginning of proceedings this afternoon, that he had received correspondence from Lord Mandelson that he wished to retire effective tomorrow, I think the 4th of February. I said on Sky News last night, would you believe that if he had any self-awareness, the first thing he should do is actually retire himself from the House of Lords.
Perhaps he was watching.
I'm not suggesting he was watching him, but I do think it's absolutely the right thing to do. Of course, it doesn't take away his title. He can still use his title if he so wishes, and that, of course, can only be taken away, we understand it, by primary legislation.
But there seems to be a clamour for that, doesn't there? I mean, there is such anger, particularly over the leaking of confidential and sensitive, market-sensitive documents, emails to Jeffrey Epstein when he was business secretary. How likely do you think it is that there might be that legislation brought before the Commons and indeed the Lords?
Well, we understood yesterday that Labour members were saying it's all very difficult. I think one of the ministers in the House of Commons said it was a very complex matter.
That was Darren Jones.
Yes, Darren Jones. So actually it's not that complex. It would just be a very distinct bill that would go through fast procedure.
A one-clause bill?
Yes, exactly. It would go through very fast procedure in the House of Commons, and I would imagine there would be no objection raised either in the Commons or indeed in the Lords.
Lord Mandelson, of course, was Northern Ireland Secretary for a while. He had to resign from that post over a passport application. What was your view of him then when he was Northern Ireland Secretary? Did you think there was something a bit about Lord Mandelson? Did you have concerns?
No, well, I mean, he was always the Prince of Darkness even in Northern Ireland, but he was quite ineffective, I have to say. Secretary of State whilst he was there. He very much enjoyed the trappings of Hillsborough Castle, which of course the Secretary of State stays in when they come to Northern Ireland. I understood had some very nice parties there as well. I wasn't invited, John, so I can't comment on that. But he was an effective Secretary of State until he had to resign, and I think that was his first resignation.
No, it was the second.
It was the second resignation. Of course, it was the second resignation.
First one was over Jeffrey Robinson's loan.
That's correct. So second resignation. And then, of course, he comes back again. But what I was really struck by was the fact that at the beginning of the year, in January actually, he was trying to rehabilitate himself and doing interviews again. And even in his interview in the Times today, which of course was given before these new tranche of emails came out about the market-sensitive information, he was claiming he'd done nothing wrong and there was no misdemeanours. Well, clearly there were, and therefore that's why there's been this growing story round about the Palace of Westminster over this past few days.
Well, more response now, more reaction from the House of Lords. I'm joined now by Lord Roberthan, formerly Andrew Roberthan, Minister under David Cameron at Northern Ireland and Ministry of Defence as well. What's your view of Lord Mandelson's resignation from the Lords?
Well, the truth is Mandelson was never very interested in Lords. He's been entirely self-perpetuating. He's been motivated entirely by himself, if I put it that way. It's good he's gone. I don't think we need any difficult machinations around the Constitution over this. We just need to see him go. Because frankly, his behaviour has been atrocious. We all knew what he was up to with Epstein. I had no personal details, but we knew what he was up to, for God's sake. And this Prime Minister decided he was the right person for the job, which seems to me to be pretty strange and a serious lack of judgment, in my opinion.
You served under David Cameron in Northern Ireland. You were Minister of State there. He, of course, was previously Northern Ireland Secretary. What was the view of Lord Mandelson in Northern Ireland?
I think he was quite well regarded in Northern Ireland because he's a very shrewd operator, it has to be said. But that doesn't mean he was honest in any way.
And what about the fact that this, obviously, attention now will turn to the Prime Minister and the decision to appoint him as ambassador? What's your view of the fact that the Prime Minister went ahead, appointed him, when there were all sorts of people warning him about what a risky appointment it was?
I think how can I put this? I think the media crowd will come to the same conclusion I've come to, which is that Mandelson was never a good choice for being Prime Minister, to be
No, he never got that far.
He never got that far, although he would have done if he could have done. No, he was never a good choice. He was the wrong choice, and I think Keir Starmer needs to answer a few questions as to why he pursued it, when everybody knew he was a bloated goods.
Bloated goods, when you say that, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, hold on, I can go back to 1998-9 when he was done for taking money, and I think he took money from a man called Robinson.
Jeffrey Robinson, yeah, that was the mortgage, yeah.
And he was lying on his pamphlet to get a mortgage. He then took money from Hindujas, apparently. That was what it said, and he had to resign over that.
That was as Northern Ireland Secretary.
He then went to the European Commission as a commissioner, and if you remember, he was on that boat that Osborne was caught on, Derek Pascoe's boat. Now, he was the aluminium commissioner, and he was on the boat of an aluminium tycoon. He likes money, he likes power, and I think that's one of his big failings, that he's too attracted by money and power.
You mentioned George Osborne there. Of course, some Conservatives quite like money and power as well. Do you think that Lord Mandelson is worse than some Conservatives? There have been a few Tory scandals over the years.
I don't think there have been any scandals nearly as bad as this one.
I see. And what about if there is legislation now? I mean, what Lord Forsyth and Number 10 have said is that he can still call himself Lord Mandelson. Do you think that should be taken away from him?
No, I don't. I mean, why? I think it's pretty pointless. Nobody's going to address him as Lord Mandelson, fun enough. If I were to see him in the street now, I'd call him Peter, as I would have done beforehand. I think anybody can call him Peter, or whatever they want to call him, but he will still be Lord Mandelson, because he was made Lord Mandelson. As simple as that.
Lord Roberthan, for a long time to come. Thank you very much. There you have a pretty scathing reaction from a senior Conservative, former government minister, Lord Roberthan there. We'll hopefully have more reaction for you from here.
John, thank you very much. Well, let's cross over to America to get the reaction of our correspondent David Blevins, who is in Washington for us. David, we're hearing about the political pressure on Lord Mandelson and on the Labour Party, and of course pressure potentially from the police here in the UK, but also pressure from the House Oversight Committee, where you are.
Yes, members of the House Oversight Committee believe Peter Mandelson and indeed Andrew Mountbatten Windsor should come here to answer questions, as former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton have now agreed to do. I have to say that Peter Mandelson was not widely known here in the United States until he was appointed to the high-profile office of UK Ambassador to Washington a year ago, a decision that surprised many people. They couldn't quite believe that Keir Starmer had gone with a man of such reputation, often embroiled in scandal. He'd twice been sacked from the British cabinet, and a man who relished the fact that the newspapers dubbed him the Prince of Darkness. But he did manage to some extent, sidestep allegations of association with Jeffrey Epstein in the early days. When he landed in Washington, the Financial Times was the first newspaper to ask him about those connections. He told them to F off. But unsatisfied with that, our own James Matthews caught up with him a few days later at an event here in Washington and again put to him questions about the association he'd had with the disgraced financier.
In June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
He was in jail at the time for soliciting prostitution from a minor.
And my knowledge of him is something that I regret. I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
Why did you have an association with him? Because he was in jail at the time.
Why did many people meet him? He was a prolific networker, and I wish I'd never met him in the first place.
So it's not just the fact that he is alleged to have accepted a large amount of money, he and his now husband, from Jeffrey Epstein. It's not just the allegation that they remained good friends over a lengthy period of time, or the very serious allegation that he provided market-sensitive information to Jeffrey Epstein. It's really the fact that it has come to light that they retained their connection, even though Epstein had already been convicted of sex offences. He'd been found guilty of procuring a minor for prostitution. So all of that has come to light, and it really has brought about the most remarkable fall from grace. Just over a year ago, Keir Starmer appointed him UK Ambassador to the United States. About 9 months ago, he was standing in the Oval Office alongside President Donald Trump, celebrating the fact that the UK had secured the first trade deal with the United States. And here we are today. He's not just been sacked as UK Ambassador to the United States, but has now stepped down from the House of Lords too.
David, thank you very much. Well, let's bring in political commentator Adam Bolton to get his reaction to this. It is a great political fall from grace, is it not?
Yeah, it's absolutely a massive one. Technically, although, of course, it's important to note that Peter Mandelson is effectively retiring from the House of Lords. He's not actually having his title removed. And as we just heard with John Craig talking to Andrew Robertson, that, I think, will satisfy a lot of members of the House of Lords, not least because previous people who've fallen foul either of the law or standards of public behaviour have remained in the Lords, although not active. And one thinks, for example, of the novelist Jeffrey Archer. That said, there will, I think, be some pressure this time round for that Act of Parliament, although I expect the government will resist that, because, frankly, this government has decided that it, having got rid of the hereditary peers, doesn't want in this Parliament to find the time for any further legislative action in reforming the Lords, although there are many things that many, including those on the Labour benches, feel should be done, such as, for example, enforcing age limits on peers.
In terms of him being allowed back into government, who do you think failed in terms of allowing him back into the fold?
Well, I think it was a risk, and Sir Keir Starmer knew it was a risk. He felt that Peter Mandelson had the star power and the diplomatic skills to do a good job as British ambassador, and we know that Morgan McSweeney, his chief of staff, was very supportive of that. Now, if we look back with hindsight, there are a number of questions. First of all, how frank was Peter Mandelson about the nature of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? For example, he didn't, as far as we can tell, say that he had been sending discussion documents to Jeffrey Epstein about government business while he was a minister. He also didn't go into the extent of, as he says himself, his toe-curling messages of friendship sent to Jeffrey Epstein. He did, however, make it clear the period over which he was a friend with Jeffrey Epstein, including after he came out of prison. So you can perhaps criticise Peter Mandelson for not being frank, although he may well have forgotten the details of his friendship completely, just as he says he doesn't remember receiving this money directly from Jeffrey Epstein, which allegedly, according to the documents, he did receive. But, you know, one can also question the vetting procedures that went on inside government, although it's fairly clear that Keir Starmer wanted for once to take a risk, but unfortunately for him, this rare risk has backfired on him.
You talk about Peter Mandelson not being frank. You posted on X, now slightly infamously, Peter Mandelson is the only politician not to lie to me. He'll thrive in the US. And you've gone on to say that's not aged well, but it still stands. I mean, do you think he was always honest with you now?
Yes, I do. I think, I spoke to him last week, been in touch since all of this. And I think, look, I didn't submit him to examination, but all I can say is when, as a political journalist over 40 years, I asked him direct questions about what was going on in the Labour Party or what was happening in politics, he always gave me a surprisingly direct and honest answer. And I think, you know, to some people, he's a very open person. I mean, I happen to know, for example, John Craig is rather gleeful at the moment because his experience as a journalist with Peter Mandelson has been rather different over the years. But, you know, you speak as you find. And I still feel that, if anything, you know, there are many faults about Peter Mandelson's character, above all the love of luxury and riches. But as far as someone who is loyal to his friends and straightforward in what he thinks, I think he does fulfil that capacity. I mean, clearly, he didn't tell the full story as he recalled it to the government when he was put into the embassy in Washington. But I think it's also pretty clear that I'm sure he's regretting it now, but Keir Starmer was very keen to have Mandelson's star power as he saw it.
Have you spoken to Peter Mandelson today, Adam?
No.
Do you think that he gave an interview to The Times over the weekend, didn't he, to Katie Balls? Do you think that was possibly a little ill-advised?
Yeah, I think it was totally ill-advised. I was reading it last night, and I mean, it's a bit of a messy interview because it's clearly taken place over 3 occasions, and the main quotes come from an interview before the revelations about his government behaviour. His behaviour while in government, I should say. You know, had he asked me, do you think it's a good idea to do an interview? I would have said no, because I think once he took the decision, certainly, that he was going to resign from the Labour Party, he should have let that stand without further commentary. I mean, a lot of people, I've just been talking to one who actually is a Labour politician who's, it's fair to say, been a sparring partner of Peter Mandelson over 40 years, actually said to me it's the first time he's felt sorry for him because of the extent of the pile-in and the glee, frankly, which some people are taking in his downfall. But, you know, what he also said is what many people say, is Peter Mandelson has been great at giving advice to other people like Neil Kinnock and Tony Blair, of course, and subsequently Gordon Brown, but incapable of applying the same level of advice and scrutiny and shrewdness to his own behaviour, and that is basically what has blown back on him in this most dreadful way. I mean, he is now crushed. He is clearly finished in public life. As you say, there's a criminal investigation. We shall see what happens there. And I would just make one point, which is, in essence, all the things for which Peter Mandelson is now being destroyed, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it, are things, frankly, which a man who is now President of the United States has done, plus the involvement in sex matters, which, of course, Peter Mandelson, as a gay man, was not, certainly, as far as Jeffrey Epstein's concerned.
Well, as far as we know, obviously, Adam, you know, there are still documents to be revealed, which we still wait to find out about. I'm not casting any aspersions.
Well, no, but if someone's a gay man who's married to another man, I think the chances of them predating on young women is extremely unlikely, contrary to the president who's talked about grabbing them by their private parts, or indeed has one sexual felony conviction to his record.
Indeed. Adam, we're going to keep you there for a little while. We're going to cross across to former Labour Party political advisor Max Wilson to get your thoughts. Max, it's been quite the afternoon.
It's been extremely dramatic, really fast-moving as well. I think that there was a certain inevitability about this. I think that it was a case of Peter Mandelson had to jump before he was pushed. There's lots of rumours flying around about the possibility of a government tabling a bill in order to strip him of his peerage. The Conservatives have an opposition day debate as well, so I think they were likely to craft a debate and a vote on this tomorrow, which would make it extremely awkward for Labour MPs. So certainly fast-moving, certainly very dramatic, and I think most of the politicians I know in Westminster will just be shocked at some of these revelations, and with the expectation that, quite frankly, there are probably some more to come.
Real questions about the vetting procedures for the government. We knew that there were questions about Mandelson's behaviour in the past. What went wrong here?
It's hard to say, because, I think there are definitely going to be questions to answer about vetting. I think there'll probably end up being some sort of investigation, if not an inquiry, into what's happened here. I think that the trouble is that so much of this has been a drip. We had 6 months ago, we had this controversy around his relationship with Epstein. That forced him to then resign from his ambassadorship. But I think that the revelations over the last couple of days have been of another level. Before, up until now, it's been really awkward, and certainly questions to answer about his personal relationship. But what I and others have been shocked by is these market-sensitive revelations, these leakings of market-sensitive information to a financier, somebody who is used to handling billions of dollars and making market-moving decisions. And the fact that a British government minister at the time was making these leaks is really quite shocking. Why the UK government wasn't aware of this, I don't know. I think that, to a certain extent, I think all of us are now seeing in real time what these revelations are, because the DOJ in America are releasing it incrementally. So I think that all of us are reacting to it, but it does certainly raise questions about that vetting process.
I mean, you say the government didn't know, but Gordon Brown himself had flagged concerns, hadn't he, about Peter Mandelson and Epstein and the sale of assets arising from the banking collapse. He did flag that there were concerns. So the Cabinet Office, whether or not they found anything, at least they knew that concerns had been raised previously.
Yeah, definitely. The fact that the former Prime Minister was raising this weeks, months beforehand definitely is a problem. I think that it is different being in government and making real-life decisions for the here and now, and Gordon Brown, who is a former Prime Minister, perhaps has a little bit more leeway about what he can do and say. But nonetheless, it goes back to that earlier point about the vetting process, what government decision makers knew and when and how they were going about making those decisions. None of it is reflecting well on decision-making processes, and I'm sure there's going to be more to come in the days ahead.
Do you think this is terminal for Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's advisor?
No, I don't think so. Not on its own, not as a standalone. The problem is that McSweeney and Starmer in different ways are already under political pressure. And the idea of the beginning of 2026 was that there was going to be a reset on the cost of living, more of a drilling down onto those core issues. And unfortunately, nature of being in government is that the government is constantly having to react to events. And that's what's happening here. And I just think that because of the pressure, or the political pressure that McSweeney is already under, that there's just this steady drip of revelations just ekes away at his ability to be able to have political authority and make decisions. So on its own, no, but as a collective, I think that it may be a problem for him.
OK, Max Wilson, former Labour advisor. Good to get your thoughts today. Thank you. You are watching Sky News Today. Coming up, we will be getting more reaction to the news that Lord Mandelson is no longer to be a Lord, that he is stepping down from the House of Lords from midnight tonight.